Welcome back to Telltale Books. I'm Greg,
I'm Emily.
and we took the last couple weeks to read A Princess of Mars by Edgar Burroughs, which originally, in its very first publication, serialized in the All Story magazine from February to July 1912.
Mm-hmm.
It was originally called Under the Moons of Mars.
Ah.
And these days, a lot of times you'll see it called John Carter Mars,
Mm-hmm.
because
Reasons.
the main focus of the story is really on John Carter.
It is. It's his story.
Yeah. And so this, of course, has being published in 1912. At that time, there really wasn't anything quite like this.
No.
There were stories like H.G. Wells and Jules Verne that went into outer space, and Wells, of course, dealt with Martians.
Mm-hmm.
There were other stories that had adventures where, particularly H. Rider Haggard would go into like Africa and find a lost civilization with a beautiful princess and have all kinds of adventures there. But there was never anybody that I know of, I could be wrong, but I'm not aware of anybody before 1912 setting such an H. Rider Haggard style adventure on another planet.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is the first time you see that.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that really, really distinguishes it then is because he's on a whole nother world, Wells was able to just let his imagination go crazy.
Yes, he could do a lot because there was no one to tell you that Mars did or didn't have such and such.
Exactly. And people thought, at that time, people really did think there were canals on Mars because they were seeing what eventually turned out to be an optical illusion.
Mm-hmm.
It looked like there were canals on Mars when you looked at it through a telescope.
Yeah.
How they explained why the canals changed every time you looked at it.
Yeah.
But they really thought that this was true, and so they thought there really was a civilization. I mean, this was Percival Lowell,
Mm-hmm.
a highly respected astronomer that was writing books about this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what prompted H.G. Wells to write The War of the Worlds and prompted Edgar Rice Burroughs to write A Princess of Mars.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you want to take the synopsis?
Sure. I'm going to try and dumb it down real, because there's a lot to unpack in this story. So there's probably a bunch I'm going to glaze over. But basically, John Carter was trying to avenge/save one of his comrades while they're out in the Arizona desert. Arizona desert. Looking for gold with one of his prospectors. And he used to be a military man, so he was very qualified to be a protector. And unfortunately, they came across a Native American tribe who was very angry, didn't want the white men there, and basically killed his partner and chased him down into a cave. And while he's in this cave, the native tribe is afraid to go in, and so they leave, and he ends up having this really weird out-of-body experience where he basically astrally projects himself to Mars somehow. And he doesn't understand how or why this has happened, but he was just very aware that, like, when he got there, he's like, I'm on Mars. I'm very aware that I'm on Mars. He encounters, the first tribe he encounters while he's on Mars is the Green Men, the Green Martians. And through a series of events, he is held captive, but ends up becoming a tribal leader, which is a weird position for them because that's not culturally how they do, and they're very, like, war-based. So they have a very, like, Viking mentality, it seems, in a lot of respects. But
he did all the things necessary.
Yes, he did all the things necessary. To earn those positions, either by accident or intentionally, as he started learning their culture and their language. And then one day, the tribes attack some airships and capture a woman who is a princess of helium on Mars, which is a big. They called them the Red Men or the Red Martians because she is a reddish tan color, and so. She's captured, he starts catching feels for her, is dedicated to trying to rescue her. Eventually, he is able to try and get them away, But then they're stranded in the desert. Then they get separated because they run into another tribe of green men that is even worse than the one that he was with and very violent. He gets captured, ends up getting away, ends up finding more red men, but who are are enemies of Helium, to find out that their leader has captured the princess while she was wandering the desert, trying to get her way home. So he has to go rescue her again from being forced to marry this other guy, and he still has a lot of feelings for her. And thus the story snowballs to a wonderful climax of a lot of blood, gore, and battling, and very, intense stuff. And then they win. And then he gets the girl, and I don't want to spoil the end, though.
No.
Because it is very different than any film you've probably seen of John Carter of Mars.
Yeah, well, there is only one.
Yeah. And
they did update a lot of things in that movie, just because, written in 1912, they probably thought there's a lot of things about it that modern audiences would not be able to suspend their disbelief.
Yeah. So I glazed over this story because there's a lot to unpack in there. There's a lot of cultural things. There's some dry parts, I think, that other readers will probably think are dry, because it sits there explaining the socioeconomic statuses, the hierarchies of different cultures, the war styles of different tribes, all kinds of stuff. So there's a lot of explanation to do the world building, which I appreciate. I love world building, and this is a really well built Martian story. But I can see some people getting very 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, where you're just really sick of hearing the fish descriptions.
No.
Some people might kind of glaze over that, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was really great world building, and I liked that there was a romance aspect without it being the whole story, essentially. It was a good propeller of the story.
It was a major part of the story, to the point where I was thinking, this really qualifies as romantasy. People are writing today.
It's a science fiction
Everybody's
romance.
reading today.
I didn't feel like it was so heavy, though, on the romance, where it propelled the story, but it wasn't mushy.
No.
In a lot of respects. I felt like there was a lot of action. The book moved really quickly.
Yeah.
It was a real page turner. Next thing I know, I'm reading 20 chapters, and I'm like, geez, I feel like I only just spent an hour here, and how long has it been?
Yeah.
It was a really easy book to get through, though. And it was a really fun adventure, and it was well crafted. And I loved the creatures, and I loved even the characters, in some of the unexpected characters I loved. I loved Tars Tarkas as in Martian. I thought that was cool. And Zola, however you say it. I loved those two characters, and I thought that they were interesting, sometimes even more interesting than John Carter himself is.
I like what was he? The dog.
Yeah.
The Martian dog.
Oh, what's his name? Woola.
Yeah.
Woola.
And it didn't look like a dog. It had rows of sharp teeth and
very reptilian.
Big and really fast, and could rip a person apart, but was also completely dedicated to John Carter, because John Carter saved it from dying.
Yeah, and was nice to it.
Would just follow him to death across the desert.
And it was just he was just nice to Mula.
Yeah.
Whereas the culture itself was very abusive towards our animals, and that's how they commanded respect. But John Carter taught them that sugar is sometimes sweeter than vinegar.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can get more done with sugar than vinegar. Which I thought was really cool. But I like that this whole story is kind of like the power of love and friendship, which it is. But it's got good morals. It's got a really upstanding main character. All the characters are really upstanding. Even the evil ones were the best villains.
Yeah.
They were just very lawful evil. And all the good characters were lawful good. And it was just it was very interesting how there was just that huge discrepancy. There were no morally gray characters.
Right.
You were either good or bad, and you were just doing the things. So, yeah.
This story, there's a lot about it that somebody could take to task.
Mm-hmm.
But on the flip side of that, I think Burroughs, in his day anyway, in 1912, was right to do it the way he did it.
Mm-hmm.
The style of writing is a little bit hard for us to read because it's not what we are used to today.
Yeah.
But the way he wrote it makes it come across like a legendary epic.
Yeah, it is. It's a space epic.
And
in
then,
a classical style.
And then the characters aren't deep at
Mm-hmm.
all,
Mm-hmm.
but that makes them larger than life
Mm-hmm.
because they are more like Greek goddesses or something,
Yeah.
or Greek gods. Or,
They are
you know,
they are the
Perseus.
stuff of legends.
Yeah, and that's how it comes across if you read books about like Greek mythology, the
Mm-hmm.
story of Perseus or whatever. That's kind of the feel you get reading the Iliad and the Odyssey,
Yes.
the way those were
They
written.
were larger
That's
than life
kind of
people.
the feel you get. And Burroughs did a really good job of crafting this to be like that,
Mm-hmm.
to be a mythology.
Yes.
And so we call it science fiction, but okay, yeah, it's on Mars.
It's a space western
And
romance.
They have some technologies that we don't have, but the science is totally made up.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so might as well be magic.
Yeah.
This is
And it really was. It was
this is
intense.
really a fantasy story. This is
Mhm.
really heroic fantasy,
in space.
which is set on Mars.
Yeah.
How is that different from Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey?
Yeah.
It's set on another world, but it's dragons.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of other the Gideon the Ninth.
Mm-hmm.
It's set in an extremely distant future, and they have spaceships and they go to other worlds, but there's necromancers and revived skeletons and all kinds of magic. It's fantasy.
Yes.
So just because a story has some science fiction trappings doesn't necessarily make it science fiction.
Mhm.
It still really is a fantasy story.
Yes.
If they just throw some science fictional things in there to make things interesting.
Yep.
And that's what Burroughs is doing here. Now, like I say, the story is a little difficult for modern readers to read because the characters and the writing is not what we're used to. It is.
Mm-hmm.
It does feel a little ancient, but not in the way like Ray Bradbury, where it's poetic. But it's
Mhm.
just it
It's almost
feels like
textbook.
epic.
Yeah, in a lot of spots,
it
too.
Feels
It's kind of like reading the Silmarillion.
okay.
It except there's a lot. It's a lot more page turning because it's
Mhm.
not like written like a Bible or scripture, kind of like the Silmarillion is, where it's got a Genesis and it's got some like lore in it, and then it
Mhm.
has like a very abrupt end because unfortunately Tolkien couldn't finish it and his son had to do his best. But there are parts of it where it does have to take a lot of time to explain why something is or is not significant to the culture that he's trying to relate
Yeah,
to.
you
or
don't
trying to
get what's
survive
going
in.
on in this world without that knowledge.
Yeah, and you
And
have to
John
have
Carter
that knowledge.
has to learn it,
Yes.
so somebody has to teach it to him.
And it's all important.
Mhm.
So it still perpetuates the story. I still felt like it was very page turning because you want to
Mhm.
know why that was significant of him to have, I don't know, bludgeoned that man to death. Or like
Yeah.
why it was significant that these two chieftains killed each other off. You know, why it was significant that he used a certain phrase towards the Princess of Helium and she was offended by it.
Mhm.
Or not, you know, or why things had significance. Especially because it is a great lesson in intercultural communications.
Yeah.
If I ever taught an intercultural communications class, this would be a great book to bring up because it does take it to such extremes, especially when you're dealing with cultures that are so vastly different.
Yeah.
And often, in this case, he's dealing with a lot of cultures that are dedicated to misunderstanding each other.
Mhm.
And trying to figure out how to make it all work together somehow.
Mhm.
And trying to save his princess and himself and everything he ever cares about. So yeah, it was a great story. I
It
enjoyed it
was.
a lot.
And it's, whether you like it or hate it, the one thing you can't deny is the influence this has had over the ages.
Mhm.
Everybody writing fantasy or science fiction after A Princess of Mars owes something to A Princess of Mars, except maybe Tolkien.
Yeah.
And C.S. Lewis. They were following different
Different mythologies.
traditions.
Mhm.
But when you're reading 1930s science fiction adventures from the pulp magazines, you can see that influence of Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Yes.
When you're reading heroic fantasy, everything from Conan to some of the other things today, is some of the works of Michael Moorcock or Philip Was a Farmer, you're seeing the influence of Edgar Rice Burroughs in those stories.
Yes.
His influence has run down through the years, the past 110 years, to impact itself on so many of the great writers of both the science fiction and fantasy genre.
Yes. And one of the things, too, that I appreciated in the version that I read, I got mine off of Project Gutenberg, but I always download them with images. You have that option on Project Gutenberg. Every one of the illustrations that was in the story was done in a Greek myth style artistry.
Yeah.
Of course, they weren't naked like they've been throughout the whole book.
Yeah.
Disappointing. No, I'm kidding.
Well, that's the other thing. You can take publishers and illustrators to task, because for whatever reason, Burroughs made his characters stark naked except for jewelry.
Yeah. Accessories.
Okay.
Important accessories.
But
to signify
publishers
status.
will almost never, ever allow illustrations to accurately portray what Burroughs wrote.
Which is unfortunate.
It's unfortunate. The copy I first read has a beautiful Michael Whelan cover illustration. And Michael Whelan manages to get that fact in there without showing anything. So
they're nude. There's perfectly strategically placed shadows. She's naked. There's a little nip slip over there.
Yeah.
Dang, she's hot. Dang, those aliens look really treacherous.
Yeah, that's why.
Yeah.
I mean, this illustration is one of the reasons why Michael Whelan has been one of the busiest and one of the greatest illustrators of science fiction and fantasy.
Yeah. It is an amazing, but it's still a really good book. Like, half the time I forgot they were stark-ass naked.
Yeah, I mean, he talks about it in the beginning and then he lets it go. Because
it's not a big deal.
It's not a big deal. This time around, I got a hold of, because I love these armchair fiction books. They take these old pulp stuff and they put them together kind of like the old Ace Doubles. This one is A Princess of Mars with Captive of the Centaurioness by Poe Anderson, which is another great space opera story. And they make good quality trade paperbacks. And I really like what they're doing. The price is right too. It's not. I think this is $12.95. It's not that bad.
Great price for a lovely damn book.
And you get 2 stories. And they usually find pulp illustrations. Now this particular illustration, I don't believe was even for A Princess of Mars, but it gives the feel.
You get it. You get the points.
Yeah, you get the point. So it's okay. But they find these old illustrations from the pulp magazines and reuse them for the stories. And of course, the good thing, the reason she got it off Project Gutenberg, is that the very earliest works of Edgar Rice Burroughs are now public domain. There are some of them published after 1926 that are not public domain, some where his family and heirs have renewed copyrights. So you got to be a little bit careful with Edgar Rice Burroughs. Some of it is completely copyrighted still. But in the case of A Princess of Mars, the copyright has lapsed and you can find free copies online.
And it's a great piece. It's a great book.
It is. It's a lot of fun.
And
you're not going to pull any deep insights like out of Ray Bradbury's Lost
City of
Mars.
But it is a fun traditional adventure story. So yeah, top 10 for me.
Yeah, I've got
it
marked as a top tail.
Excellent.
There.
Top tail.
So definitely, have you read Edgar Rice Burroughs? Have you read A Princess of Mars? What do you think?
This is part of a series, correct?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The Del Rey series was 11 books. I've only got 10 of them.
Delightful.
And it went for a long time. He was still publishing Martian stories in Amazing Stories in the late 1940s.
Nice. Very
and
nice.
The quality, like most series, the quality kind of goes downhill gradually. I would say the first
2 or 3. Usually 3 tends to be the cutoff for me.
I think up to either Mastermind of Mars or A Fighting Man of Mars, which is the 6th and 7th books. It stays pretty fresh, and after that it kind of goes downhill for quality.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would love to read more of this because the ending was a real cliffhanger. Not yes, but no.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it wrapped it up, but it did leave things open for more books to be written.
Which was good.
He did with all of his work.
All wide open. For the whole
If you're going to write fantasy, it has to be a series and not just 2-3 books.
I know, every time, which gets exhausting sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm a busy girl. I don't have a 30-book series to dedicate myself to. I don't want that.
But at least each of these are only like 160 pages.
Honestly, you could probably
these
read
days where each
2,
individual
maybe
book
3
is
of
1,000.
these. Yeah, 2 or 3 of these feels like one of today's modern fantasy.
Yeah.
At a time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So they're quick reads.
Yeah. 10 out of 10. Please read it. If you haven't, do it.
Yeah.
It's great. And honestly, like, I'd even let kids read this. It's so tame. Yeah, they're naked.
Yeah.
Whatever. It's very tame.
There's
nothing weird.
There's no description of sexuality in this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they get together, but there's no description of
nothing's
anything explicit, unlike today's books.
Yeah. Other than violence, which most kids' books these days have a considerable amount of violence.
Today's books, again, get extremely violent.
Yeah,
the violence in
very
here
graphic.
Is not that graphic.
No, this is, I would let a 10-year-old read this. Honestly, it's not bad. It's a great piece of literature.
And I guess the only thing I would nitpick from today's viewpoint is the characters are not super well rounded, but in particular, Deja Thors is very much the words. I need words.
She's a cardboard character.
She's cardboard, but she's a cliche.
Yeah, she is. But she's probably the cliche that started it all.
Well, yeah.
To be honest.
Well, there were, like I say, H. Rider Haggard before this wrote that kind of character, the princess of the lost civilization that all the guys are drooling over. Deja Thors, everybody loves her. Everybody thinks she's the most beautiful thing on earth. And yet she's not conceited.
Yeah.
But she does save John Carter's ass at one point. So she's not a wimpy flower sitting on a pedestal waiting for guys to save her. She does get into the action and start kicking butt in certain places. So, but otherwise she is very much the cliche, goddess on a pedestal that everybody worships and is totally beautiful and can do no wrong.
Yeah.
Which, of course, we all know is the furthest thing from the truth.
I sassy. I would never be on a pedestal. I always tell my husband, putting me on a pedestal gives me a very long distance to fall. And that's how it goes. And to smush someone below me.
Yeah, throw things down. Gravity takes over and it hurts a lot more.
Yeah, hurts a lot of people. Hurts a lot of people putting people on pedestals.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, other than that, good book.
Mm-hmm.
Enjoy it.
So leave us comments and like us and subscribe to us and come on back for more. This is actually Burroughs' first published piece too.
Woo!
Right out of the gate, he was just blowing everybody away. His number 2 book was Tarzan of the Apes. I mean, let's see an author top that.
Tarzan, which we will eventually get to. I want to read at least one.
Yeah, I want
the first Tarzan if we
I
can.
want to read it.
Yes.
I've had a number of his Tarzan books now.
Tarzan was the first movie I remember seeing in theaters.
And that again is going to be one where, well, depending on which one you saw, the old
not that one.
Wes Miller one. From
I've
30s,
seen those after that, but the very first ones that I saw were the Disney one.
Okay.
Which was also quite bad. Anyway, that's another story for another time. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Bye.
Bye.